most important thing for me is relationship building. It's conversations. It's asking them, what are we doing for you? What's working? What's not? Relationship building to me, it's strategic. It's the magic ingredient in the special sauce.
The reality is, if you can't build relationships internally and be seen as that friend and that ally, how on earth are you going to get ahead? You do not get the results unless people can buy into your story.
Through our customers, they really help advocate on our behalf and why work harder when you can work smarter.
The importance of being able to get those allies, build those internal relationships that are going to help you get ahead. If you can't do that, you can't be a good marketeer.
Recently I got some feedback that was quite triggering. That feedback was, you guys don't know our customer. It's hard to take. Leaning into your Salesforce and using them when you're coming up with ideas and when you're rolling out campaigns is just going to be the magical one that you need.
I think the world's changed now. Looking at a kind of multidisciplinary, multi-tactic, multi-channel approach that pulls your customers in by telling stories, that's often where the real magic happens. Hey guys, and welcome to another, what will always be, amazing episode of Marketing the Madness. Now, today, I feel like we're like sisters in marketing. The lovely Laura not only has actually previously been a client of mine, but leads field marketing at Contentful and has probably one of the most similar views to me on marketing in anyone I've ever met or been lucky enough to interview on this podcast. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you because we're going to delve into something. Well, we're going to get straight into it today, guys. I'm going to get Laura to give us a bit of the potted history of Laura's career. But pre that, I just want to kind of frame today's episode because we're going to talk about the importance of relationships when it comes to marketing. Now, if you haven't listened before, hi, by the way, I'm Katie, the host for this podcast, but the importance of relationships to me is huge when it comes to marketing because effectively that's what you're trying to do when it comes to marketing. So marketing for me, and I know you feel the same because that's exactly what we're going to talk about today, is all about relationships. What we're trying to do when we deliver marketing is build relationships with an audience that we, ideally want to pull into the fold and help build a relationship with that's going to be positive, hopefully, for both parties. So it's about creating relationships that matter, creating relationships around, the things that we can help our audience with, which effectively, let's hope, if the match is right, they're going to become a potential client, customer, whatever it might be. So that's what we're going to delve into today. Before we do that, I just wanted you to frame Laura and tell us a little bit about your career before we start talking about the importance of relationships and why you're so passionate about that.
Okay, so great to be here. My marketing experience spans 16 years, I think. So went into marketing straight at university, always kind of had an interest in the area. Straight out of uni, worked in the property sector, fitness, and then moved to the world of agency where I stayed for a long time, actually. And I feel that that's really kind of shaped me. I've taken so much from that time. So I did 12 years in a customer marketing agency that specifically focused on advocate marketing. So started off as an account executive, worked my way up to an account director where I managed accounts across the tech world, HP, Salesforce, and some, really great brands where I could spin multiple plates and really immerse myself into the world of tech marketing. And following that, I'm currently at Contentful, so lead the field marketing team there. The kind of excitement there is really, I think I was just at that stage of my career of wanting to fully immerse myself into one brand and move from that multiple hats that I'm sure you understand as an agency founder. And just throw myself into that one brand and use all of that experience across the tech space to try and make an impact. So that's what's led me to today.
Yeah, and here we are. And we're going to be talking about exactly that. Now, at one of Contentful's larger internal events, you won an award recently. Can you tell us what you won an award for?
I did, yes. So I won the FY24 Friend and Ally to the Field Award. There are awards for outside of the sales organisation, voted for by the sellers. So I think, it was, being quite honest, humble brag moment, a real high point. It was exactly what I've been trying to achieve, just become that friend, to actively listen to what our sellers need, and to try and problem solve for them. So yeah, it was a really nice moment to receive that award, and I've got the nice glass statue at home.
Yeah, I love that. But I remember you putting on LinkedIn, and I think, well, we're going to talk about this as well later about, how being a woman in the world of business, sometimes you're like, that friend and allyship, it almost feels like the fluffier part of our role, and therefore not as important, or not as worthy an award, but like, not something that traditionally people think is important to be awarded. But I mean, that's what the whole podcast is going to be around today, is truly the reality is, if you can't build relationships internally and be seen as that friend and that ally, how on earth are you going to get ahead with getting the stakeholders that you need on board internally to make the magic happen and make the change happen, which I think that's what I kind of, having worked with you, I see you as is this real change maker and someone that can bring the rest of the business with you, get them on side, because that is such an important skill, and one that maybe I haven't spoken about enough on the podcast before, is, the importance of being able to get those allies, build those internal relationships that are going to help you get ahead and do the things that you want to do, because you need that support. So tell me a little bit about, I guess, how you've done that, not just at, you've obviously been recognised for it at Contentful, but how you've done that in your career and the importance of you doing that in your career to get to where you've got to, and to be able to make the impactful changes that you've been able to make.
Relationship building, to me, it's strategic. I think you've just summed it up beautifully. We need it. It's like it's the magic ingredient in the special sauce, I believe. I'll tell you a story, actually. Let's go back, because I've not always felt that. And I think that, I've come a long way just in terms of age. I think you start to lean in a bit more to your skill set, but also experience, seeing that, oh my gosh, this actually works. So back in my agency days, we get the opportunity once a year, and it was like under 30s, I think maybe 10 spots, almost felt like The Apprentice, to apply for something called the Chime Innovate Board. And it's a really fantastic initiative, actually. I just went all out, I think, maybe about 27 at that point, and I was like, I'm going to go for this. So it's 12 months executive experience, essentially. So you get mentored by a member of the board. You get the opportunity to, come together once a month and strategize on ways to, help the agency. I was really fortunate. So I applied, I got on, and I was actually mentored by the now female CEO, an amazing woman. And lots that I learned from there. But day one, our kind of initiation or icebreaker session was that we were actually sent StrengthsFinder. So it's StrengthsFinder 2.0. They kind of call it the talent DNA. So it's talking about leaning into that skill set rather than looking at frailties or, weaknesses. What are our strategic skills, and how can you use them to, make you successful in business? You read the book, you do the quiz, we've all seen them, but this is, it's a deep dive. And I think there's around 34 character traits, I believe. And I think there's 4 different sections that these fit into. So one of them is relationship building. The other one is strategic thinking. I think the other one's executing, and I always get this one wrong. It could be like analytical, or I don't know, something like that. So no surprise, I'm sat here talking about relationship building. Yeah. So out of my top 5, it was extremely heavy. I think 4 of them were relationship building, 1 was in strategic thinking. And interestingly, I've actually done it twice in my career, and I think the top 4 have always remained the same. The 5th has been interchangeable, and I think that's just experience. Yeah. However, mine were relationship building, and that day, Katie, I may as well have walked in with a pink feather bow around my neck. That's how I felt. I felt like not only was I, the only northerner in the room, I was also coming in with this skill set, which I was like, oh my gosh, I'm an imposter. I shouldn't be here. Like, I'm not a strategist. And I think some of them were like competitor, achiever, and we were going around the table, we sat around the boardroom, and the internal narrative was, you do not deserve a seat at this table. What are you doing? How have you walked into this? You're going to get found out. And I couldn't see that actually, strengths of empathy, harmony, communication, positivity, woo. They're all such amazing skills. And actually, I wish I could go back to that 20-something and be like, hold on, girl, it's going to get better for you. You lean in fully to those traits and don't try and be the achiever and the competitor and the analyst, because it will serve you well. I hope I never forget that moment. And, moving on from that, it took me a while to really embrace those skills. I think I tried to kind of almost dull myself down a little bit and think, oh gosh, what good is harmony in business? How is that going to make me a better marketeer? How can positivity be something that's going to, create great campaigns, for example? But actually, I have fully leaned into that. And now those are the things that are bringing the wins. Within my working week, the most important thing for me is relationship building. It's conversations, it's speaking to your sales force, it's asking them, what are we doing for you? What's working? What's not? It's all of that great stuff. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But as you can tell, relationship building for me, I'm super passionate about, and I just wish that I had that insight at that earlier age, and that earlier stage of my career.
Yeah, I'm so with you on that, by the way, because I think we're probably quite similar in that I felt exactly the same when I was younger. I'm actually now, so I've done more of the Myers-Briggs and the colour insights. Will, have you done the colours thing?
I have, yeah.
So I used to come out yellow-red, because I think yellow is the relationship, whereas now, because I'm older and a bit more long in the tooth, I'm red yellow. But I think I was always, I'm red and yellow, like through and through. So red is the more kind of dominant leadership. I don't even know if it is about being strategic, but like I have my opinions and I'm very confident in delivering them. And the yellow is the empathy, not empathy. I think empathy is green actually, but it's more about the kind of, the ability to kind of be very social and very, the importance of, that to me back then was I knew that I was, the motivator in the room, the friendly person, the kind of fluffy, excitable person that maybe, focused in on the relationships. And I never really understood, the same as you, in my, mid, late and early 20s, the importance of that when it came to delivering and getting people on side and, internally getting the buy-in for the, ideas that I had. Because if you can't do that, you can't be a good marketeer. You've got to be able to market yourself and your ideas internally, as well as then, create those ideas and, build those relationships externally through your marketing. So I think understanding that, anyone who's listening, having heard, what you learn, I think that's super inspiring, and it kind of sets the tone for probably everything we're going to talk about today. You've started to highlight in there, though, something that I am very passionate about, and it's the relationship between sales and marketing. So, it goes back to relationships, of course, and being able to form those relationships, but understanding and listening to the salespeople to create better. I mean, the amount of times, especially in tech companies, and I'm sure you've experienced this at places that you've worked with, and maybe even in your current, in current environment, but I think so many times sales and marketing are looked at independently, and there is no togetherness. I hear this from my brother a lot. He's worked at lots of huge tech companies. I won't name all of them, but he feels like there's such a disconnect. He's like, the marketing team aren't delivering the things I need as a salesperson to go to market with any strength or even warm leads. Like he's still having to cold call because he's not being delivered from his marketing team what he believes is, the lead generating content and tactics that are going to help him with his outreach or even help start those relationships. So he's having to do it cold. So I think what you're bringing in your current role is a real connection between sales and marketing. So talk to me about, I guess how you're doing that, your ethos and what it is that you want to try and do.
As I say, it kind of starts and ends with those relationships. So active listening, trying to dig into like, what does a seller's day-to-day look like? I'm in marketing. I get excited by the big brands and the Hollywood productions, and they work, like they work at a certain point in the funnel. We need to kind of highlight that. However, some of the most impactful things that I've created have been like those one-sliders, those summary slides of challenge, solution, benefit, and they slot them into their presentations, and hunky-dory, easy lift for us, it delivers for them. But I guess, that kind of listening piece, we've got to, rather than just, rolling campaigns out and expecting them to be on board with it and, kind of communicating this too late. What we're really trying to do is listen to our sellers and, have a few champions within the business that we can bring into the fold and bring into that ideation process so that, it's not falling on deaf ears, because there's frustrations on both sides. I think as marketeers, we're like, come on, guys, come on, we've done all of this, now execute. So we can't expect them to do that if they're not on board from the very beginning. So I guess it's, over communicate, say the same thing. Honestly, I think that our sellers get sick of me hearing my voice. We have pod meetings and, I present to the sales leadership, and often it's the same thing, but I always kind of feel that means you're doing something right. If you're communicating the same message over and over again, it goes in and we're not kind of jumping from one thing to the next. It's not random acts of marketing, it's repeatable stuff. So communicating with them, letting them know what's coming up, and you can then bring them into that conversation. I recently had a conversation actually with our BDR team and got some great feedback that I've been translating assets into local language, and they were like, actually, thanks, but we don't use that. And I've pivoted, so now we're looking at, well, actually customer stories are more impactful. So how can we, quickly get a few of those out so that we can really support them? So it helps us to not randomly do stuff that they're not going to use. Over communicate, listen to them, really tap into their knowledge as well, because, these guys are smart. They're sat there in front of the customer day in, day out. I think, recently I got some feedback that was quite triggering, because I think that's the other thing that we can do. Ask for feedback. How are we doing? Let's not be arrogant and assume that, we're the world's best marketing team and we're doing everything for our sellers. There's always room for improvement. So ask those triggering questions of what are we doing right? Where can we be better? And that feedback was, you guys don't know our customer. That's hard to take. It's really, it's a tough pill to swallow hearing that. But the reality of the situation is I'm not sat having coffee with them. I'm not on the phone to them day in, day out. So leaning into your sales force and using them when you're coming up with ideas and when you're rolling out campaigns is just going to be, the magical one that you need to pull together and do something really impactful.
I love that. It's so simple, but so often forgotten and not done. So can we talk about the practicalities of that? You talked about things like pods. How are you building those relationships and gaining that knowledge from your sales teams? What kind of things can our lovely listeners do to really start to build those bridges and focus on understanding the needs of your audience a bit better via your sales team?
Weekly meetings, joining them, listening to what's going on, and that could be I sit in like the quarterly business reviews, and some people might think, well, it's really dull, and I'll go and present at them, but actually I want to sit around that table and listen to the challenges, because actually you can go away and then think, okay, well, I've heard that this is happening in the Nordic region. Can we pivot strategy? I think in EMEA, what I find is that it's not a one size fits all approach. We've got cultural nuances. I can be very general here, but how I find it at Contentful is, particular regions are great at running events. They want to be out there. They want to be mixing with their customers. They want that kind of intimate approach. Other regions, they want me to go, here you go, here's a platter of net new logos, where they've not had to do that kind of that grind of inviting. Our sales teams are busy, they need us to kind of lighten the load. Being involved in those conversations, hearing about, you want to hear about sales pipeline, how it's going, so that you can start to really challenge yourself and go, okay, things are not looking so good. What can we do as, a quick win? What's the low-hanging fruit so that we can support them? So I think just immersing yourself fully, if you can, go and have coffee with them. That's what I'll be doing later on today, meeting one of our sellers. And it's all about that, relationship building, knowing what's going on in their world as well, I think is really important, and wider than just work, I think sometimes it's just great to kind of like what makes them tick, what's going on at home, like how can I make your life a little bit easier? So just get yourself into the seller's world. And I think once you've done that, you also signal to them that I'm open. So you'll find people coming to you with new ideas and, great opportunities to to really do some cool and interesting things that you might not have even thought about. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, they are the door to your customer knowledge. They, like you say, they do. The salespeople have the conversations that we in marketing don't have. So if you're not talking to your salespeople, you're losing such a huge amount of knowledge about your customers that would be so easy for you to gather just by interviewing and talking and having coffee. Not interviewing sounds is too formal. That's not what we want to do. But having conversations with your sales team and bringing them into the funnel earlier, because they'll be able to help you create better marketing tactics, because they know what their customers want and need right now, right?
And no one wants a disengaged sales force.
No.
You know, ultimately, we're putting big money into campaigns and, you know, a lot of time and resource. The last thing you want to do is kind of fall at the last hurdle, because these are the people that we're expecting to go out and execute on this stuff as well. So, yeah, it's hugely important.
That I think possibly the most important and the most forgotten thing. If more tech companies can learn from what you've just said and bring the salespeople into the development of those marketing strategies, that shift change in terms of the amount of opportunities it will create, because one, you'll be able to develop better strategies that are talking better to the needs of your audience, but two, you've got an engaged sales force that are then going to run with those opportunities because they've felt included and, you know, they've been part of that journey with you, and they want to follow up on those leads in a more, you know, engaged way.
Absolutely. And we can go off data. We can say, well, you know, this asset's really performing well, so more of that, please. But actually, it's about anecdotal feedback as well. I think that's really important. You know, I recently did, collected some customer stories to fit into one of our integrated campaigns. And, you know, I was looking at which are performing the best, but actually it was having that conversation with the BDR team that really shifted it, because it was like, well, okay, we're getting eyes on these assets, but these are the conversation starters, so these are the ones that you want to include, you know. So it's just like digging that little bit deeper, and I think, you know, it starts and ends with the sales team.
Yeah, and with relationships, that's what it's all about. If you don't have that relationship, you can't even get started. I'm always inquisitive to know, like, in the current market, I think there's been a lot of change recently. You know, the world of marketing is ever changing, but I think in the world of B2B marketing, gone are the days of, you know, cold calling, you know, flat kind of, you know, fairly boring email campaigns. What kind of content and campaigns are really working for you guys right now? What are the campaigns that you're working on that you can really see, this is the kind of marketing that we need to be doing to gather more opportunities?
I think it sparks my brain onto that whole B2B shift. And I know you've covered this on a previous podcast about it's no longer B2B, it's B2Human. It's those campaigns that really resonate with people, because we're not marketing to bricks and mortar. You know, when we think of like a business, we think of like a physical entity. What we forget is these people are like you and I. They're humans that are triggered by emotions and storytelling, and, you know, they sit and scroll Instagram. They're just normal people. So, you know, when you create these campaigns, we've got to think about that. We've got to think about, well, okay, what are their pain points? You know, what's the headache, and how can we fix that? How can we be the medication for that headache? I think for me, I'm always going to lean onto the customer storytelling piece, because I did like 12 years in that realm, but it works. And I'm, you know, bringing that into a lot of the field activities as well. You know, I always kind of think of it of, you wouldn't go on book holiday and spend a few £1,000s without checking out, like, well, what does everyone else have to say about this place? You know, what are the reviews? What are people, you know, what was the food like? You dig deep, and that's just for, you know, perhaps a few £1,000s. However, if you are a CTO or a CMO about to make tens or hundreds or even millions of dollars worth of investment, you know, what's the evidence? You know, what are my peers in my particular industry sector as well? What are they saying about this? You know, campaigns that bring in that customer evidence are the things that are going to really turn the needle. And then I'm not just talking customer stories, you know, they're great, bringing them into the fold when it comes to events. So again, this is the relationship piece again, because you're only going to get that if you've built solid relationships with your customers. They're going to advocate on your behalf. So those whole campaigns where you've got the collateral, which, you know, customer stories is always going to be a big part of that. but also ending with, events where we did one recently with one of our great customers where, he sat there in a fireside chat at a huge trade show in Germany. And honestly, you just kind of think, job done. What are we even here for?
Yeah.
Because he's selling for us. So it's those campaigns that I think are really, really beneficial. Also, recently we're kind of looking at more verticalized campaigns and making sure that that our journey when we're nurturing our prospects is solid, and well thought out. So it's not just we do events and then we throw them into an email nurture sequence and there's nothing of substance. It's actually we've got verticalized campaigns where I'm thinking from a field perspective as well. Well, let's make sure that our events, and we had this discussion earlier today, didn't we, where they're impactful. Yes, they're a bit niche. And I think initially we freak out and we think like, oh my gosh, how am I going to fill the room? Because, it's my net isn't wide enough. But actually having a wide net is not a good thing because there's no pull for someone to come to that. Why would you take 4 hours out of your day and travel to something that you're like, well, what's the value add? What am I going to get out of that? So I think, just really connecting the dots is the key. It's like, okay, well, what kind of collateral are we creating? What events are we doing? And do they all tie in? What trade shows are we showing up to as well? So yeah, I think it's a very long-winded answer, but that's kind of where my head is at the moment, of just making sure that we are always kind of tying into those campaigns.
Yeah, it covers all the things that I would say. So you've answered everything in the way that I would exactly advise our clients to deliver those campaigns. I think that's why I was looking forward to doing this podcast today. I just want to map in on one thing that you say there, because I think it's really important. Certainly the event side of things. Now, obviously, that's what we've worked on together, like delivering these kind of events. But I think so many people go to, they go to these trade shows. In fact, I went to the Retail Tech Show last week and was speaking to someone who's exhibiting there. And it's really hard, if you've paid for a big stand, to get the value out of it if you haven't got those customer success stories. Yeah. The only time, I've done a lot of these events throughout my career, delivering them for clients, where we'd gone and we'd invested in these huge shows, spending tens of thousands of pounds at showing up. You do not get the results unless people can buy into your story. So it's all well and good people meeting people on the stand, but where the real magic happens for me every single time, and I'm sure you'll empathise with this, or you kind of have already, is when you're on stage with a customer talking about what you've been able to achieve together through your technology and your journey together. That's when everyone comes to the stand afterward. I mean, I've done those kind of events. We've told the story on stage, and then afterwards we've had people queuing up at our stand to go, okay, you did that for, I think one we did was actually with, well, I won't name the brands, but I'll name the customer. I think it was for the FA. We'd done like this huge major kind of digital transformation project. And then after we told the story, we told what we were able to achieve, how we did it, how we used the different technologies to empower the FA to get further faster. And literally we had people queuing at the stands with RFPs afterwards because we told the story. They could connect with the person. They could understand how that helped them in their role. Because I think what people often forget to do is, so whether you're doing that, I think the world's changed now. It's not just, I think actually delivering your own events is often more impactful than just going to the big trade shows. But looking at a kind of multidisciplinary, multi-tactic, multi-channel approach that pulls your customers in, or potential customers in, by telling stories about how you've helped other people solve similar problems, that's often where the real magic happens.
Hugely. And like I say, spent the last 12 years working on that. It's powerful, right? You don't want to make random decisions. And I think also it's about that, like connecting with your kind of ideal customer as well. The way to do that is by telling human stories. I think gone are the days of the whole stuffy boardroom, like corporate videos. People want to hear real stories and resonate to it. I think, I'm totally in agreement. And as I say, we've done that with our trade shows where we've made sure that as often as possible we get that speaking opportunity, because I think, we've got a huge story to tell, and through our customers, they really, help advocate on our behalf and why work harder when you can work smarter.
Yeah. And then you're creating tactics and things that you push out in your go-to-market strategy, that you're building relationships outside. So I think, the story you've told today is beautiful, because it's about how the relationships you create internally power the relationships you're able to develop externally, because that's what marketing's all about. Effectively, you're building relationships with your potential future customers. So if you can't develop the right tactics and the right touch points within your marketing to nurture people, to build you want your prospects to feel like they know you so well, they know your product, they know how you can help them so well before they even pick up the phone, or not necessarily the phone, email, inquire, whatever it might be, however they start that conversation with your salesperson, whoever it might be, they feel that they've already got a relationship with you. And that's the challenge in delivering really good marketing.
Absolutely. Yep. Couldn't agree more. And I think, it goes further than those internal relationships, as I've touched on, using your customers as advocates. I think you've got to also see the whole, well, what's in it for me, piece, because actually, yes, customers can sell on our behalf, and that's great. But actually I've had many conversations with a number of customers where it's kind of a personal branding piece for them. Yeah, I want to speak more. Great. Let's use them. The CMO here at this place, is on a real kind of mission to have her voice be heard a little bit more, so you can really tap into that. So I think understanding what's the personal driver really helps. And the same with sales, actually. I think understanding for them, that, as I say, they're busy, so break it down. What's in it for me? That's what people want to know. Like, yes, they want to be on the whole kind of corporate train of like, banging the drum, yeah, this is our mission, but actually, what's in it for me individually? As a seller, how will I benefit from doing X, Y, Z? So I think, that kind of goes back to that advice piece on how can you make that relationship work for you. I think understanding that, like the personal motivators behind it, from a customer standpoint, well, this is an opportunity to really elevate your brand and to partner with an equally great brand. And it's almost a bit of free marketing for you. From a sales perspective, again, it could be that. It could be an internal driver of, hey, I see myself as a VP of sales one day. So to do that, you need to work with marketing and, and help on these events, and you'll get there through doing that. So I think it's that, just tapping in when you scratch the surface of various relationships, you can kind of really understand like what's that driver, what makes that person tick. Sounds very manipulative, doesn't it? No, oh my goodness.
But it's true. I think that's the key, is you've got to talk to the needs of the person. Yeah. Again, in B2B marketing, we think so much about the business, what the business needs, but you're talking to a person who is trying to help that business get to that end goal. So you've got to talk to the person.
Exactly.
and the things you can help them. And it isn't manipulative, because the reality is you're genuinely not going to try and sell something to someone that isn't going to help them, because that sale is not going to go very far if you do that.
Exactly.
If you try and sell a product or a service or whatever it might be to someone that doesn't really need it, that no decent salesperson's ever going to try and do that, because it's going to be a very short relationship and it's not going to work, and it's not going to help you tell your story, and they're not going to be a good customer advocate. So you're only going to really try and sell something that's going to help them achieve their goals, both in their career, in their job, and for their business.
Absolutely.
So, don't think of it as being manipulative. Think of it as being really helpful.
It is. It's extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And, I'm all for it.
Yeah. My last question,
yes.
Laura, before we move on to the next part of the podcast, which is, well, just as important. It's going to be around how females can get ahead in their career. Mm-hmm. I think what you have really dialed in on today is the importance of those internal marketing relationships that will help you get ahead. So if you've got a couple of tips for our lovely listeners, what would they be when it comes to developing those internal relationships that are going to power the external marketing?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I would say book some time out with different levels within the organisation, because I think they can give you a really unique perspective. So ask them about their day-to-day. What does it involve? What does it look like? What is marketing doing for you right now that's helping? And actually, the challenging stuff as well. What are we not getting quite right? What can we change? How can we make your life easier? How can we take the headache away? I think, you know, that's always going to be my first go-to. And actually, I challenge myself with that sometimes, because naturally you get busy without taking a breath. And actually, I think it's important to just take a step back, go back to the team and say, okay, we've done this over the last couple of months. How is it for you as a sales team? I think the next piece of advice as well is like the mentorship piece. There's always going to be people within the organization, not even in the same department as you know, that are willing to give you advice and to listen, to just put you on the right track. There's a few people throughout my whole career, I've always had that. And I think it started with that agency experience of being on that board and having that mentorship from the CEO. I've always tried to find that not even one person, actually. I've got a couple here, that one formally as a formal mentor, and then there's others that I just go to for advice. And I think that that's great. You know, building those relationships means that you can go to them with the challenging stuff. They can use their experience to put your head back on, and quite, you know, let's be honest, we all need that sometimes, but also to look to them and to, you know, really help accelerate your career. I think those relationships are always going to help you, because they're going to be a large voice in a room when you're not in it, and they will always advocate on your behalf. So I think, you know, those two pieces of advice I will continue to take with me in my career, and I think would be really beneficial. And I think it's something that I wish I leaned into a little bit earlier in my career. Things would have perhaps been a bit less clunky when I was first getting going, especially, you know, within the sales organisation.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, Laura. Such practical advice as well. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I certainly have. I mean, I just always love talking to you. So we are now going to end this episode, and Laura and I are going to stay here, and we're going to talk about how we can all, as people and businesses, help women get ahead in their career. And I know Laura has got some really practical advice and some things that we wish we'd told ourselves maybe in our 20s that I know our younger listeners will find really, really helpful. So a big thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much.
We're going to stay online. If you found today's episode helpful, insightful, interesting, and you want to hear more from Laura, then please do make sure you subscribe and tune back in next week, where we'll be talking about how we can all help empower women to create more, well, I guess, better workplaces. So whether you're a man or a woman, we need you to come back and listen next week.